All right, welcome everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 139th meeting that we've had consecutively. Thank you all for joining us in this process. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed, my co-moderators. And as always, I like to remind people of why we created this forum 139 weeks ago. And it was to bring the international peace movement together. I'm sure as many people who've been in this process are aware, there have been lots of operations to prevent us from working together. And we want to say enough of this. We want to bring people together of many different philosophies, religions, cultures, wherever you're coming from. If you are for true peace in the world, you are welcome here. And we often find that through dialogue and discussion, and trying to work on the problems of the world, we're actually able to coordinate our activities and have a pretty large impact on the planet. So thank you all who have been part of this process this whole time, and those who are new. Please take a moment to share the invitation with your friends and organizations and reasonable enemies to be part of this. I want to say a few words regarding Graham Fuller, who, as many people know, has been part of this process, been a veteran not only of the United States, but also a veteran of the International Peace Coalition. He passed away, unfortunately, yesterday. He was a member of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. He was an Islamic scholar. He was a very, very outspoken former military veteran against what we're seeing in the world with the evils and collaborating with us very, very, very openly and strongly in order to make this mission possible. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge Mr. Graham Fuller's life and the mission that he upheld in his life and the mission that we're going to continue to uphold now. So I'd like to just take a few seconds, just a few moments to remember him. So thank you very much, Graham Fuller, and we will continue this fight with you in our hearts. So we shall continue. We have a very wonderful lineup today, which are including other veterans who have been part of the process in exposing what's happening in the world. And to start us off today, we have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Thank you. Hello to all of you. I cannot start with anything else than with the increasing incredible danger of a new war in the Middle East. It may not happen, but it also could happen within the next 2 to 3 days. There is a rather significant force of up to 40,000 American troops, which have amassed in the region, with 1 aircraft carrier already there, 2 are on the way, 2 more are on the way. And, the prelude to this situation was naturally these demonstrations which took place over the change of the year, where now the Western media and Western politics accusing the Iranian government that they would have killed up to 30,000 people. And they have put the Revolutionary Guard on the list of terrorism. This was also done by the European Union. Now, it should be stated that the Iranian government put out statements emphatically denying the Western account of these events by saying basically that they acknowledged that the concern and complaints by the demonstrators at the end of last year were legitimate, that they had started to talk to them and promising them to try to remedy it because it was due to the high inflation, to the effect of the sanctions, which naturally have hurt the Iranian economy tremendously. These sanctions should have been ended by the 18th of October last year, because at that time UN resolution 2231 was basically running out and the sanctions should have been lifted. This, however, was not done. Now, then naturally there were large demonstrations, and according to the Iranian government report, Western government support for ISIS-like terrorist activities, targeting everything from hospitals, schools, kindergarten, shopping malls, government buildings. So a tremendous damage was done. And they say that in the context of that, a lot of people, unfortunately, were killed. But basically, then they point to the fact that these were foreign instigated violent attacks. And they name in particular an tweet by Pompeo on the 2nd of January, where he said, congratulations to the demonstrators, and everyone has a Mossad agent besides him. And the statement by the Iranian government also points out to the fact that even the Israeli media in Israel had reported about Mossad and Israeli support for the demonstrators inside Iran. So what should have happened was that if you have a tragic development like that, there should have been a call for an international investigation, clarification, diplomacy, and not a military buildup in the region, which, according to President Trump, is bigger than that massing before Venezuela. And Vice President J.D. Vance said that there are a lot of options on the table, and it is basically a total commotion going on in the region, where all the neighbor states, or most of them, are urging the United States not to use force. Several countries have announced that they will not allow the United States their territory to be used, like Saudi Prince Mohammed Al Salman said Saudi territory is not available for this. Now, if there would be a strike, it would not be a little one, relatively speaking, like in June, the 12-day war, because in the meantime, naturally, Iran has prepared much more. They have strengthened their defenses, and it is expressed by experts commenting on the situation that, that if there is a strike, it would not be 300 or 400 cruise missiles, but it could be 1,000 bombs and more. And Iran has already said that their finger is on the trigger. If there's any attack, they will retaliate absolutely massively. And naturally, it could inflict enormous damage on Israel, which, they obviously are taking into account, it seems to. Now, if this happens, it is very clear Iran is not only prepared to hit back at Israel and American bases in the region, but naturally also they have already said that they will close the Strait of Hormuz and therefore deny the access for the oil going through there on a daily basis of 20 million barrel or maybe even more. And that could immediately cause havoc in the oil markets, bring the world economy to a screeching halt or close by. And given the extremely volatile situation around, the flight out of the dollar, which is definitely going on, the fact that the Western financial system is sitting on this debt bomb of more than 2 quadrillion outstanding debt, it could trigger a collapse of the world system in ways we have absolutely warned against for a long time. So so if this happens, it could trigger a catastrophe in the world. If the aim obviously is regime change, the sanctions were aimed to cause a regime change. This did not work. Reports from people who have traveled through Iran, they all report that the population on the other side has moved to support the government because they realize the foreign nature of this destabilization. But if such an attack would occur, naturally havoc would break loose, and a country of 93 million inhabitants could become an area of utmost instability, refugees, crisis, chaos, and one can only, in the strongest terms, warn and call upon the peace movement internationally to take this cause up quickly, because it is an immediate danger. Now, obviously, this takes place in the context of an already extremely tense strategic situation where, fittingly, the Organization of Atomic Scientists has moved the doomsday clock just 9 seconds closer to doomsday, namely from 90 seconds before to 85 seconds before. And that is because we are in the last days before the last arms control treaty, the New START treaty, is expiring. And then there will be absolutely no arms control structure anymore at all, which naturally is also an element of extreme danger. And, obviously, in the context of a new arms race, of which a nuclear arms race is obviously the most worrisome, because, as if we would not have enough nuclear weapons already to kill mankind 20 times over if it ever comes to the use of nuclear weapons. Now, obviously, the strategic situation in general is one of turmoil or rupture, as the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had said in Davos, because you have on the one side the two security doctrines of the United States, the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy. And if you read these two papers carefully, it is very clear that there is no change in the US demand to maintain hegemony. They want to absolutely prioritize the Western Hemisphere, what we have seen with Venezuela and looming other dangers of Cuba and Colombia, Mexico. But they also want to have total hegemony on the Indo-Pacific. And the only thing which is changed is that the Europeans are more told, that they cannot really rely on US military presence for European security. And also the US is supposedly having a diminished role in the Middle East, but that is obviously countered already by the present military deployment I was talking about in the beginning. Now, the only thing which is changed is that all the fluff which existed in the previous administrations and security doctrines about democracy, about humanitarian interventions, about human rights, all of that is dropped. And, instead it is mere power and might makes right. Now, the speech by Mark Carney in Davos, where he made the amazing admission that the rules-based order was a narrative which everybody knew was fraudulent because it had the double standard all the time. Only the powerful would interpret it according to their interest, but the weak ones basically had to suffer the consequences. In any case, he admitted that the narrative of the rules-based order was a fraud. Now, in the aftermath of all of these developments, you have significant realignments. And not only did Mark Carney travel to China and make a significant agreement with China, which angered President Trump already significantly, but also Starmer, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, did likewise, went to China with a large delegation of more than 50 major businessmen. And they also agreed on deepening the strategic cooperation between Great Britain and China. And what that signifies, obviously, is also an end to the pretext of de-risking, whereby the Europeans had taken the line, maybe decoupling from China is too much, maybe we should go for de-risking. So this de-risking is over. and the Anglosphere in particular, the Canadians and the British, are obviously realigning with China, recognizing, this is typical British, they always go with the strongest force to then manipulate the other side. We have seen that in the past. But this obviously raises the question for every country on the planet, especially naturally the Europeans, who are in a complete crisis. The German economy is in a free fall, insolvencies mounting by the day. Likewise, it is not much better in France, in Great Britain, and naturally the rest of the European countries are affected by that as well. So therefore, the question is, what should every country do in order to maintain its self-interest? And that is why our initiative to call for a new security and development architecture, and as we did in an EIR emergency session on January 12th, to call for an international movement of world citizens to make sure that we have a world order based on international natural law, on a new security structure which takes into account the interest of every single country. Now, obviously, in such a new security structure, the United States would also have to play a role, however, one of an equal among equals and not one of a dominant power. And one can only hope that the citizens of America, who are right now confronted with a massive crisis around the developments in Minnesota, where it's hopefully seems to have calmed down a little bit after the ICE agents were pulled out. However, the country is still in a complete state of turmoil. We will hear about that from people on the scene momentarily. But there has started a discussion: is there an American fascism proceeding? And an author called Patrick Lawrence, who some of you may know, called it fascism like an American apple pie, and said it's not the question if, it's the question to stop it. So I can only say the fact that we have the anniversary of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, which established America as a republic, as a constitutional republic, and it was called a beacon of hope and temple of liberty at the time. That is the tradition America must go back if the world is supposed to get out of this crisis in a peaceful way. And obviously, our efforts are aiming in that direction. So that is why I can only ask you to join our effort to build this international movement of world citizens in every country, that you join our efforts to spread the message of the proceedings of January 12th and the declaration which was agreed upon by the panelists. We are presently in an international mobilization to expand that mobilization to as many countries, institutions, and individuals as possible. Please sign the declaration and help us to approach governments, institutions, and individuals to increase this effort. We are planning to have another, even much, much bigger conference on the 2nd of March. And until that time, we want to have a change in the international discussion, which is extremely urgent, as should be clear by what I reported about the Middle East situation. And I have not even touched on the Ukraine, which is not yet settled, or the looming situation in Venezuela and other countries in Latin America. So that is really what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Great. Thank you very much, Helga. I'll make sure to put those links in the chat for people to grab in just one moment. We do want to go and bring up a clip of Graham Fuller, just in honor of him and his participation in the IPC and everything that he's done with us. If we could just pull that clip up of Graham Fuller. Okay.
I think there is now greater ground for hope that we can perhaps implement a bold plan like the Oasis Plan, which involves water, land, resources of all kinds, oil and energy, and reshaping the entire region. I think there is a better chance now that we will not find quite a Cold War interfering in the same way as before. Certainly, the United States is anxious about China's rise in the world, and that's not going to change. The U.S. is sort of stuck now in a struggle against that rise. But nonetheless, there is no real ideological struggle in the sense that Mao Zedong in China or the Communist Party of Russia were promoting ideas of global communism. That is simply not the case. And we have, I think, a more relaxed international environment in the ideological sense. Russia, too, is now, many may argue about the entire Ukrainian conflict, but Russia is emerging as a new power now in a different, very different iteration, and surprisingly enough, receiving a great deal of sympathy and support from the emerging global South. And I would have to identify the global South, the new emerging global South, as yet one other truly major factor in the developing international situation. The Chinese Belt and Road, which is kind of part of the Oasis Plan or whatever you will, but the BRICS and the emergence of the BRICS, the countries of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and now being joined by many other important heavyweight players in the economic players in the world, is changing that geopolitical situation as well. So I think there are new players in the game. It is no longer a two-way or even a three-way Cold War struggle. It's involving far more players with far more voice, far more confidence in themselves, and being able to speak out about the way the future world architecture should exist. And it's in that sense that I think I'm quite optimistic that we are looking at new factors and hopefully escaping from some of the very worst of the past.
Thank you very much, Graham Fuller. You will be well remembered. Former vice chair of the National Intelligence Council, served as the station chief for Cabal of the CIA, and wonderful friend. So thank you very much. Okay, we shall continue with our agenda. So next, it is a great pleasure to have you on, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. He is a retired U.S. Army soldier. He worked as a security subcontractor for the Israeli and U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which I'm sure many people on this discussion are very aware of, and what you did in exposing this, Colonel Aguilar. And it's also been brought to our attention that you are now running for Congress. So thank you very much for throwing your hat in the ring and for fighting for truth and justice. It is a pleasure to have you on. You have the floor.
Well, thank you. And it certainly is a pleasure to be here. This week, I was in Minneapolis, standing with the people of Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the protesting and solidarity against ICE agents being deployed. And now I'm in DC. Today, I'll be participating in the nationwide general strike and protest, and specifically the protest against ICE here in DC. And the objective from my position, why I'm participating in this, is that I am calling for the abolishment of ICE. And I will continue to advocate for that on the Hill by encouraging U.S. representatives to draft resolution in the House to bring that about. Not only do I think that it's time to abolish ICE, I also think that it's time that the United States government sit down and abolish the Patriot Act. If you look at the Patriot Act over time, over the last 22 years, Aimé Césaire wrote about the imperial boomerang in 1950. And if you consider what's coming home now, that's exactly what it is. And perhaps a more poignant way of describing it is what Malcolm X would have described as the chickens are coming home to roost. And he said that in terms of when DM in South Vietnam was assassinated in relation to JFK being assassinated. And that when you bring that colonial imperialist domination, surveilling, killing, assassination, controlling of a people, and you export that through colonialism, it comes back. And we are seeing it in the streets of America. We are seeing it every day. What the world witnessed in not only the killing and the murder of Renee Good, but then days later in the killing and the murder of Alex Preddy, and throughout the days in between and the days after, the absolutely uncalled for, unjustified, aggressive, violent tactics of ICE agents against American citizens is a reflection of that imperial boomerang in practice. The tactics that we're seeing on the streets of our country are no different than the tactics that I witnessed in the streets of Gaza against Palestinians, unarmed Palestinians. And the excuses were the same. Well, they were in the way. They were seeking food, starving people seeking food, who were pepper sprayed, tear gassed, beaten, shot, killed because they were in the way. It was their fault. We're seeing the exact same narrative play out with American citizens. They shouldn't have been there. Well, he shouldn't have been carrying a gun. Essentially saying you shouldn't exercise your constitutional rights. And if you do, expect to be killed. That behavior is being normalized. And in the context of the greater discussion, what I would like to emphasize right now is that the optic of Greg Bavino being removed from Minneapolis is simply window dressing. He was in a position as the commander at large of CPB over ICE, both of which are agencies within the DHS. That is a made-up position. That's window dressing, an optic. He was removed from that position, and it has no consequence. It has no consequence on the agency. It has no consequence on the position. It has no consequence in the authorities or lack thereof because it doesn't exist. It's appeasement. Bringing in Homan, we're now going to see that the continuation of those tactics. We are seeing some changes to policy, yet to be seen in practice on the streets. I'm not encouraged by any changes to the tactics on the streets because the ICE agents we have employed to the streets around our nation are poorly trained, poorly disciplined. They are not trained and experienced to handle situations in domestic policing and de-escalation, and it will get worse. Ohio is next. We're seeing that. Simultaneous to that will be Georgia. They're building up there as well. This will continue. So as the administration continues to face backlash to obvious intrusions upon our constitutional rights and our freedoms as people, where it's becoming more and more clear every day, they attempt to sow a narrative of appeasement of, oh, look, we're doing something about it. And they're not. Now is not the time to retreat back into our comfortable corners of, oh, everything will be okay. The government is going to take care of our interests. Now is the time more than ever to stand firm on the demonstrations that we've made, to stand firm on the progress and the momentum. Minneapolis was a test. We could have failed that test miserably. We suffered in that test, but ground was made. We can continue to make that ground, and it doesn't have to be violent. It can be peaceful through protest, through demonstration, exercising our constitutional rights, voting. As it was said, I am running for Congress, and I'm not running for Congress because I have aspirations of political greatness or because I'm looking for a second career in government service. I served 25 years in uniform. I spent years upon years upon years away from home in war. I've missed birthdays, births, anniversaries, Christmases, nearly every milestone in my life I've missed, gone and deployed to war. I've punched my ticket on government service and suffering and serving on behalf of my nation. I'm running for Congress because I want to serve the people. I travel to DC at least once a month, if not more. And in those visits to DC, I engage directly with members of Congress, representatives, and senators alike. And not one has impressed me with their grasp of what's going on, nor their ability or willingness to do something about it. We do have some good ones, I would say. Some in the Democratic Party, some in the Republican Party that will speak out and call things for what they are, but it's not enough. We need more people that are willing to go to the Capitol, that are willing to serve in government and stand up for the people, for our rights, not for industry, not for the military industrial complex, not for AIPAC, not for a foreign government, not to make action because they're compromised or complicit in some blackmail scheme or in some files or complicit or compromised by finance or money, or they have an ulterior motive or interest. We must rid our Congress of that. So as I go forward and my advocacy, to make clear, I absolutely stand and demand the abolishment of ICE and the abolishment of the Patriot Act. If you haven't read the Patriot Act, or you haven't read it in a while, since it's been since 2003, go back and look at its inception and how it has grown since then, not through law, not through approval of the people, simply through the expansion and exercise of executive order, and simply through the expansion in practice and the stepping over of red lines that were once red lines that we never thought we'd see in our country, that we now see as normalized behavior. It is scary. And when you look at that and you see where we were then and where we are now, that's the plan. That was always the intent of the Patriot Act. And we're moving every day closer to that end state. And if we don't stand up now, and if we don't make a stand against it now at our 250 years of celebration of this country, it is time once again that we review, when it is time to throw off the ties that bind and the shackles that oppress and replace our government with people that will represent us. And it's possible. This is not hyperbole. This is not a dream or a fantasy. This is possible, and we can do it. And I call on everybody to stand up to do that, whether it's your ability to influence over social media, whether it's your ability to write and influence through educational writing or op-eds, whether it's your ability to go and speak or go to Congress or influence in legislature, whatever it may be. Everything matters. Everything's important. And right now, no time is more important than now. But to be hopeful, the opportunity is also no better than it is right now. The opportunity we have is great. And I'm encouraged, and I hope that everyone else is encouraged to get out and do something, because that's the only way we're going to change it. But I'm happy to be here on the panel, and any questions or discussion about what I've been up to, Minneapolis, DC, various engagements throughout the country. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar. It's really a pleasure to have you on. I'm including your website in the chat, but if people are on over the live broadcast, they can go to aguilarforuscongress.com, and please check out his website. You're running for Congress in North Carolina, is that right?
North Carolina, District 13, and the Republican incumbent is AIPAC recipient and a strong advocate to continue providing lethal munitions to Israel. So when you think about it from an aspect of why are we providing lethal munitions to Israel to use in Gaza if there's a ceasefire supposedly, but also consider the cost to the American tax dollar. Every time a GBU-38 guided munition with enhanced guidance kit drops from an F-35 or an aircraft over Gaza, the U.S. taxpayer paid for it at about 50 grand a piece. And you consider how many have been dropped. The United States has spent about $50 billion on munitions being dropped in Gaza just since October 7th. So when you ask yourself, wouldn't it be so much better if we could explore options like universal health care, universal childcare, improving our schools, improving our own community policing and community connections with civil service within our own communities, a higher minimum wage and a more respectable living wage, all those nice things that we could have here if we just stop paying billions of dollars on bombs. We could start there. That would be a great start.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is absolutely the case. And I think that we can take that point and bring it home that if you actually want to see real development happening in your country and to have good spread across your country, then let's stop wasting it on killing people. So thank you very much, Anthony, Colonel Aguilar, for that. We'll continue and come back because I'm sure there are absolutely lots of questions that people will have. So thank you. Next, we're going to go to Josephine Guilbeault, who is another friend of the IPC. She's a former U.S. Army all-source intel analyst and served for 17 years, a cybersecurity expert for U.S. Cyber Command and the Cyber National Mission Force. And she's also with the Eisenhower Media Network. And you were on the ground in Minnesota. I actually saw that you were arrested and then released. But I am always very appreciative of the work that you're doing, Josephine, in bringing people together, your active voice and very outspoken voice. So thank you so much. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Because I'm just returning from being on the ground in Minneapolis, I want to address the escalation in Minneapolis that many are witnessing as someone who was just there. On January 26, 2026, I was arrested in a way that should alarm every person who still believes the Constitution means what it says. This is not about partisanship. This is not about ideology. This is about the line between a free public and something that begins to look like a police state. The founders were very clear about one thing. The government exists to serve the people, not to dominate them. That principle is written into the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendments. Free speech, due process, protection from unreasonable seizures, and equal protection of the law. What I experienced was a direct violation of those principles. The community was not rioting. There was no looting. There was no violence. People were standing together, playing music, honking horns, and expressing themselves peacefully, ordinary civic expression, the kind of First Amendment was written to protect. And yet the response was not measured. It was not proportional. It was overwhelming. What happened in Minneapolis was not routine law enforcement. It was an escalation of force against American citizens that mirrored military-style operations. Tactics designed for foreign battlefields, not American neighborhoods. For more than 2 decades, under the global war of terror, the United States built an entire security architecture focused on counterinsurgency, military equipment, preemptive threat assessments, surveillance-driven policing, and that idea that control must be established before dialogue. Those tools were justified overseas by labeling population as potential threats rather than as people with rights. Now, that military imperial boomerang has come home. The armored vehicles once used in Iraq and Afghanistan now roll through American cities. The intelligence framework designed to identify insurgents are repurposed to monitor civilians. Fusion centers blur the line between foreign intelligence and domestic policing. Crowd behavior is treated as a battlefield rather than a constitutional issue. And the mindset that emerges is deeply dangerous, that citizens are something to be managed, contained, or neutralized rather than listened to. We are told this about public safety, but history teaches us that governments always justify overreach with the language of safety and security. The real question is, safe for whom and at what cost? Because a society where people can be arrested while playing music and honking their horns is not a safe society, it is a fearful one. The Constitution does not disappear in moments of tension. It does not become optional when authorities feel challenged or inconvenienced. In fact, it matters most precisely in those moments. The normalization of the global war on terror era tactics in domestic policing, overwhelming force, zero tolerance escalation, and preemptive control represents a profound shift in how the state views its own people. That shift is incompatible with a free society. Law enforcement has an important role, but it is a limited role, bounded by law, accountability, and restraint. Power over free people must always be the minimum necessary, not the maximum available. When those limits are ignored, the damage doesn't end with one arrest or one city. It creates precedent, and precedent spreads. If this can happen in Minneapolis during peaceful community expression, it can happen anywhere in this country. This is not chaos versus order. This is liberty versus unchecked power. A nation that imports the logic of the global war on terror into domestic life is a nation drifting away from its founding ideals. That drift does not correct itself automatically. It requires citizens willing to speak plainly, demand accountability, and insist that constitutional rights are not optional. I am speaking today not out of anger, but out of responsibility, because the Constitution is not self-enforcing. Rights only exist if people are willing to defend them peacefully, lawfully, and unapologetically. We demand, as American citizens, a de-escalation, accountability, and a return to constitutional policing that respects the dignity of American citizens. Not today, not after the next shooting, but now. And I want to add that what I am witnessing and what I just experienced is identical to what I have been witnessing on my phone inside of the West Bank, inside of what we learn about 1930s Germany, a police state, a militarized police state against citizens. And as long as this goes unchecked, it will escalate into cities across this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. It's very useful to have an on-the-ground perspective of what happened there because, as everybody knows, the United States media likes to make up stories and lie and exaggerate things and hone in on a handful of anarchist types that want to provoke these horrible, violent reactions. So I think we should just be mindful of that. And this is a very useful report from you. And I think what you're saying is very true. So thank you very much, Josephine. So I will, we're going to continue with our agenda, and we're already getting a bunch of questions in for people who are watching. I'd like to go to next Diane Sayre, who is a United States presidential candidate. She's running as an independent, and she has an upcoming important press conference. Please go ahead, Diane, you have the floor.
Sure. Thank you very much. I presume I can be heard.
Loud and clear.
Okay, very good. Well, one other crisis point which fits into the strategic picture is that on February the 5th, the New START treaty will end. And as the former president of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, pointed out in an interview recently, he said this will be the first time in 50 years that there has been no arms treaty in effect between the major nuclear powers of the world. Colonel Doug Macgregor did a short 10-minute video warning that this is going to lead. He said, look, people have heard about, since COVID, the gain-of-function research to make viruses more lethal and deadly, which could potentially lead to an out-of-control situation. He said, I'm talking about nuclear gain of function, where, according to Colonel Macgregor, the regulations for the development and deployment of nuclear weapons, especially after this treaty goes out the window, will be less than the regulations on an electrician who comes to fix the sockets in your house. We already know of a number of cases where it was just the decision of a single soldier in a nuclear submarine or in some other position who decided not to obey the signs that a missile was launched either from the Soviet Union or Russia toward the United States or from the United States toward the Soviet Union, and made a personal decision not to launch. With also AI coming in and making a lot of these decisions, do we really want to be on a hair trigger all of the time for a species eliminating thermonuclear war? Because the types of weapons that people will develop unchecked, since this is a major part of sustaining the bubble, will be beyond the imagination of what we can consider right now. So on February 5th, I will be holding a press conference at 4 p.m. It will be online. I will post the RSVP link in the chat to discuss this matter and to put forward my proposal for what the sitting president needs to do about this. I think it's outrageous that President Trump has not responded to President Putin's offer, which was made last September, that the treaty be extended another year with no conditions while the US and Russia work on repairing a very damaged and strained relationship. So far, there has been nothing but silence from the United States government. So February 5th, 4 p.m., I will be joined by Scott Ritter, who's not only a former UN weapons inspector, but was part of the very first team that was sent to Votkinsk in the Soviet Union to verify the compliance with the INF treaty in 1987. He's somewhat of an expert on arms control. The program will be moderated by Garland Nixon. And going into that, I will be conducting a series of short interviews to put this on the agenda, including with people who have been with us here, like President Donald Ramotar of Guyana, who can give a perspective on this from the Southern Hemisphere, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, whom you know here, leader of the Schiller Institute and convener of the International Peace Coalition and very well known internationally. Also, Colonel Doug McGregor will be talking, building into this. So I just wanted to put that on the table to encourage everyone to participate, to get the word out. I was speaking with someone earlier today and she said, "This is the first I'm hearing of this." And I said, yeah, and it may be the most important thing happening in the world right now, that they're taking the cork out of the bottle and there would no longer be any legal framework or limit on how many nuclear weapons a nation can produce. And let me just add, Colonel McGregor made an interesting proposal. He said President Trump should declare no first use. That should become the US doctrine again, and that all nations, I think there are 9 of them, which possess nuclear weapons, including Israel, should be held to abide by that standard. So that's what I wanted to share. Thanks for giving me the time to let me make that announcement.
Thank you very much, Diane. It's just a very important day to be emphasizing this offer that was done on the START treaty from Putin. So I'm including in the chat the RSVP link for people to register to get on that. If you are press, definitely register for that so you can be part of the Q&A portion when we do go to that. I'm sure that people would very much like to participate. So if you know any other press or anything like that, you could share that as well. So thank you very much, Diane, for making that announcement. So now we're going to continue on to the discussion with the panelists. And I know we've got a couple of questions. I want to make sure we are able to get things in before Colonel Aguilar has to leave. So let me go to Helga Zepp-LaRouche. I know you had a few thoughts on what's been discussed so far.
Yeah, I want to answer in particular Colonel Aguilar and Josephine about what they were reporting about the situation on the ground. Especially Josephine, you mentioned that the idea was to contain the people. And, that is why I want to remind people that we absolutely have to fight on this question on the highest level, which is the image of man. What is the image of man of a republic and our efforts? Because the idea that you need a strong police state to contain the people, that comes from the British Empire and Thomas Hobbes, and the idea that you need a Leviathan, a strong state, because the nature of people is evil, only the nobility is good, but the average people are evil, and therefore you have to contain them by fear and force. And I think we should really remind people that this is why the American Revolution was fought against the British Empire, because Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and Adam Smith, these are all the ideologues of the empire, against which Benjamin Franklin organized all the Leibnizian networks in Europe to support what became the American Revolution. And if we want to celebrate the 250th anniversary by making these ideas alive again, we have to discuss this, because, the image of man is not one of, that the people are evil and only respond to force. That is a fall into barbarism, imperialism, colonialism, and all of these evil forms of government. So I wanted to encourage people that we, really use that to set up everywhere, either activities to celebrate the ideas of the American Revolution, to make them known again, because people don't know that Benjamin Franklin and the founding fathers were of a completely different conviction. They were Leibnizian in the sense of the Declaration of Independence, that life, liberty, and happiness is an inalienable right of all people. And happiness means not just being happy like you use it today, but it means to have a fulfilled life by unfolding all your potentials, which are given to you by the Creator, and you become a productive human being by doing what furthers the interest of the humanity as a whole. So I would interject that and say that we have to inject the ideas of the celebration of the American Revolution in this present ferment, because we have to uplift it to the highest level of ideas.
Thank you, Helga. Anthony, I see you popped up. Would you like to say anything in response?
Not particularly. I was just popping back in because I was unmuting myself again in case there
Okay.
was, but I think I completely agree with that statement that yes, in this 250-year anniversary of our nation is when we should harken back to the words of our own revolution and why the founders wrote what they wrote, and that this idea that the U.S. citizens are inherently bad and must be controlled is not in line with the ideals of American society and what we stand for. And I can also say that that's just not true. From during the crises, plural, of which have been going on in the United States, to each of these places, I've traveled there. Josephine has traveled there. We've been together in either Minneapolis or DC or throughout the country. And what you see described on legacy media and this narrative of trying to paint the picture of Americans being these out of control, violent citizens, that's not true. And it's ever important now that we embrace the words of our own revolution and the spirit of that revolution as to who we are as Americans and who we are as people, humanity. Humanize. We've seen that the administration has attempted to dehumanize victims such as Renee Good or Alex Preddy. That attempt to dehumanize is not a coincidence. That is a tactic, and we must all acknowledge and stand against it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar. Josephine, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just want to caveat off of what he's saying about legacy media and the way that they're reporting, because after my arrest, Fox News released a report, and it was very much targeted towards me, since I have a very impactful and essential voice as a 17-year veteran and a former intelligence officer. It certainly was targeted towards me to produce these articles, and quite frankly, they lied. They said that I was charged with rioting when the reality was I wasn't charged with anything. I wasn't read my rights. And so that like those types of lies are existing inside of mainstream media to, like he said, dehumanize us, to try and affect our credibility on the stage. And so this is, obviously this is something that I knew before after witnessing the genocide, but this is something now it's personal to me because I'm watching them lie about me very blatantly. So yeah, I just wanted to layer that again for the audience that's listening, that mainstream media is lying.
Absolutely, which is why it's all the more important that we're bringing in alternative media to be part of this process. So definitely, if people who are part of that media process, please keep reaching out to more and inviting them to events like this in order to find out what's really going on the ground, not just in the United States, but around the world. We take reports like this all the time. I know we do have a question from Jose Vega, who was just on an event with Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar last night. Why don't we go to you, Jose?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. Tony, Josie, Helga, Diane, Anastasia, it's great to be joining all of you. I promise I'll keep these remarks brief, but first, I just wanted to recap a little bit on what Tony and I did last night on this Congressional Forum Town Hall that has been hosted by Matthew Ho, Kelly Lane, and Sam Husseini. And the idea was just to get candidates to sign a pledge, of course, on staying true to their independent roots. And one of the conclusions we came to was what Tony had, talked about, which was abolishing ICE and also abolishing the Patriot Act. And I had said something too about, well, the only way people are going to vote independent is if we remind people of what it means to be independent in that spirit of the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country. I quoted the Declaration of Independence, and I had said that people want big ideas and that my constituents deserve to be on calls like this. And I referenced the IPC. So that's what we did last night. I had a question to Tony, and I also would extend it to Josie as well. But I wanted you, Tony, to sort of talk about your trip coming to the Bronx. Both Anthony Aguilar and Josephine Gilbo, I had the privilege of bringing them to New York City, to the Bronx, which is the poorest congressional district in the country. And we had an event there called the Bronx's Gaza West. I wanted to ask if both of you could review just a little bit of that time here, but specifically on you, Tony, in the comparison between Gaza and the United States. You were talking about the Imperial boomerang earlier, about what we do over there is what we're doing over here. But, you actually got to come here to one of the poorest places in the United States. And also the difference between patriotic self-defense on behalf of your country and complicity in genocide. So that's just what I want to throw in here.
Well, first of all, to our visit to the Bronx, when you hosted us, and we also got to speak at the town hall and in the boxing gym, but also the previous trip and touring the Bronx. It is a betrayal to the American people that our government continues to spend and send billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars to a foreign government to feed a war machine, while our own citizens here in the United States, and particularly the Bronx, where buildings fall apart and the facade of buildings fall and crumble into the streets and injure or kill people, or housing that is substandard, where Americans are living in substandard housing, dangerous substandard housing. And we can, before we even have to look at various reforming of programs or taxation or any type of change in that respect, let's just stop sending Israel billions of dollars a year. Let's stop sending, let's stop spending this year, 192 billion, and next year, potentially $1.7 trillion on a military industrial complex driven war machine that serves no purpose to the American people in our national security. If we started there with reducing the budget, having an audit of the Department of Defense, an actual audit that is executed, that they are held accountable for, that they must answer for, and that there are cuts and reductions made in that spending, in addition to cuts and reductions made to overall spending, because we don't need that, and stop giving billions of dollars to Israel. Right there alone, you can already start putting money back into benefits for Americans, our infrastructure, our bridges, our roads, our buildings, our schools for our children, providing the groundwork to reduce premiums in Medicaid, to have universal health care. These things are not impossible to achieve. And we can probably make some pretty big steps in it if we just stop giving away billions of dollars for genocide. And in Jose's particular district, the person that he's running against is Ricky Torres, who takes a lot of money from AIPAC and who firmly believes that we should continue to fund them with weapons and bombs and munitions to continue the genocide of the Palestinian people. And to me, that is a betrayal to the American people. That is a betrayal. If you are an American politician and you represent the American people in our highest office, and you are siding with giving a foreign government billions of dollars over your own constituents in your own district that suffer in the poorest district in America, that is an act of betrayal. In my opinion, there is no other word for it.
Yeah, as far as my experience, the thing that stands out the most, honestly, is how many of the people at the town hall are concerned. I mean, there's no doubt that that area understands that Richie Torres has done nothing to actually benefit them. And for me to see more people and American citizens being engaged in this election process is exactly what we need, because surely the average voter is, middle or upper age, and our younger generations haven't been voting. But Mamdani proved that you can ignite the youth into participating in the electoral process. And for me, that's one of the memorable things about being there, is that these people are participating and are engaged and want to, be a part of putting in someone that truly is going to represent them.
Thank you both, Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar and Josephine, for your answers. I see Diane Sayre, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to also say something on this topic because it's local and it's international, which is a certain philosophical outlook that Lyndon LaRouche identified after the mass killings at Columbine. And he spoke about a combined two-factor shift, which will allow people to become mass killers. One was the dehumanization part of it. And I think the paper he wrote was called Star Wars and Littleton, where he identified the creation of the characters in Star Wars who were sort of part human and part not. And you can think of the brainwashing being done to children now with characters like Barney, SpongeBob SquarePants, where children are presented with characters that are sort of human but not really, to allow this confusion about the distinct nature of a human being. You combine that then with a lattice of arbitrary rules, and the brainwashing for that, you might think of Squid Games, where the rules are red light, green light. You stop on red, you go on green. If you make a mistake, it is legitimate to execute you. Now, we have seen this both foreign and domestic policy in the way that the Trump administration uses the tariffs and the sanctions. If your nation does not comply with what we declare, then it is our right to starve you to death. And that's just how it is, because we declared that was the law, and therefore you must obey. Similarly, the brainwashing that's being done on the American people to get them to go along with what Josephine and Tony witnessed in Minnesota is, well, Renee Good was told by an officer to get out of her car. She didn't do it. Therefore, she was shot. I'd ask everyone to take a step back and think, is that law that if you happen to disobey an officer or you can't understand an officer, as Scott Ritter pointed out, you have people spraying you with tear gas with a mask on, maybe you can't understand the instructions, you don't obey, you get executed without a trial, without, this is not the law. That is not the standard. There are standards and there are laws, but the question is the highest law, which is natural law, which is what our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence were designed to uphold. And a mild response to one of the questions, I will just say that our founders, particularly the anti-slavery leaders like Alexander Hamilton and Ben Franklin and John Quincy Adams and so many others, were very, very aware that our nation was imperfect. In fact, they spoke of forming a more perfect union. But that doesn't undercut that the principles they expressed, that every human being is born equal with unalienable rights, was not a true principle. That is a true principle. And it is for us to insist that that is upheld. But I wanted to really address this because I see so many people falling into this. Well, they didn't, do X, Y, they tied their shoes the wrong way, so therefore we shot them. And it was justified because they were not within the confines of what somebody defined as an arbitrary system of rules.
Right. No, exactly. And I think if we don't defend what is the real principles that the United States was founded upon now, then we could very much lose the concept altogether. And I don't normally like to bring up, I'm as an American, but yeah, as an American, this is an incredibly important concept for me. But as a world citizen, I know this is an incredibly important concept for the world. And that if we don't defend it as the first nation to have created a republic, then what are we becoming? And that's my view on the matter. I see that President Donald Ramatar, you've raised your hand. Please go ahead.
First of all, I would like to congratulate Mr. Aguilar, the Army military man who's taking a stand on this at this time. I think I just want to say that we need more of that, people who understand what war is, understand what military is, to bring it to the attention of the American people, because a lot of them I don't think understand what actual war is. I want to congratulate him and to encourage him, because what we're seeing too in the United States is the protest that is taking place is telling us that people are beginning to really want to have change. They don't want to live in the same old way. They don't want to be giving their money to Israel. They don't want to spend $1.5 trillion on military to enrich them in military industrial complex and to enrich the oil barons and so forth. They want, and while at the same time in New York City itself, I heard on the news yesterday that people were dying from the cold, homeless people living on the streets in New York, dying, freezing to death, and probably that's happening in other parts of the country as well. So I think we have to put up a strong fight to transfer some of this enormous wealth that is being pushed into the hands of the very rich, because I just saw also Oxfam's latest report where they said there's a growing amount of billionaires, more than 3,000, and the top 12 of them got more money than the bottom 50% of the world's population. Therefore, if you take the total wealth of the 3,000, then probably they have more wealth than 95% of the world's population. And therefore, there's a definite need for a better form of distribution of the world's wealth to the people. And there is a level of desperation, too, that is seeping in to the ruling class at this point in time. And that is why we're seeing more and more threats. In order to sustain the system, we're seeing major threats to Cuba now, that Cuba is in imminent danger of being attacked. I understand that the President of the United States announced an oil embargo on Cuba. How is he going to enforce that? Does it mean that the military will encircle the island as in 1962 to stop ships taking fuel into Cuba? I think we have to deal with this matter. And in Iran, too, we know that the latest protests that took place in Iran was heavily organized by the CIA and Mossad in order to try to have regime change there, another country with an enormous amount of oil, which they want to get to. Finally, I would just like to say, well, congratulating you, my colleagues there, for taking such an important stand in the, what I will say, the belly of the beast. But I would say that you need organization to sustain it. It's not only mass appeal, but I would just like to encourage you to build strong organizations, sustainable organization, to sustain this struggle, because it could be a very long struggle ahead of us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Donald Ramotar. And also, if you wouldn't mind turning on your camera so we all can see your dignified person.
Good-looking
That would be
face.
wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And for those who don't know, President Donald Ramotar is the former president of Guyana. So we are honored to have you on today. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to see if there's any other discussion amongst the panelists before we continue. We do have one item to review for the audience. So let me see if there's anything else from Helga or Anthony or Josephine, if there's any other thoughts before we... Helga, I see your hand.
Yes, I would like to ask everybody who is watching this session or participating in it to help us to focus on the declaration which came out of the June 12th emergency session. This has been discussed among the panelists back and forth, and a lot of productive ideas have been developed. And the declaration is now in its final form, at least for this period, calling not only for the establishment of a new security and development architecture, but also, going into several of the solutions, like a new financial and credit system, a new economic system, a world land bridge infrastructure, and so forth and so on. Please take a look at the declaration, and if you agree with it, please sign it and get it around to everybody you know to also sign it, because this can become the focus of the effort to reform the international legal system, including the United Nations, which, at this point is not really able to function because the structures as they were designed immediately in the post-war period, by giving essentially all the power to the five victory parties of World War II, is now ending up that there's always a veto of one or two countries, and therefore every decision is being blocked. And there needs to be an urgent reform, which could come from the UN General Assembly. So this is part of our mobilization, but for that to have as many signatures under the declaration is really extremely important. And I think it is also, the recent developments make very clear that all of humanity is really sitting in one boat, that the kind of violence which is being portrayed in Gaza or Venezuela or wherever is exactly of the same nature like the violence being applied inside the United States. so that this idea of a boomerang of imperialism is really a fitting image. And, I remember it was Ramsey Clark, the former Attorney General of the Johnson administration, who became the lawyer of my husband on his own initiative, who basically pointed to the fact that this is more than 30 years ago, that the violence used in the United States foreign policy is exactly the same kind of violence which is ruining the United States from the inside. So that makes all the more important, to really start with the idea of a humanist renaissance. And I know the word humanist in America has a different meaning than in Europe, but what I mean by that is to go back to an image of man which defines man as inherently good, and that it is the function of the Republic to bring forth the best in every human being and in society at large based on the common good. And if we don't hold up these principles, the danger is that we deteriorate more and more into a barbarism where we could not get out of in the end. So please sign the declaration, get it around, and join our mobilization to build an even larger convening ourselves on March 2nd. So if you agree with our approach, contact us and join our efforts, because I think it's the most important initiative on the table, because we are not just warning against what is, but we are also providing solutions. One of them being that we have to move the whole world into a new paradigm where nations cooperate and that the confrontation stops, because in the time of thermonuclear weapons, it could be the end of all of us. So please join our efforts.
Great. Thank you, Helga. Thank you very much. And I've included in the chat the declaration. We'll also move on to the petition, which you had put forward last week for people to review. But I'm going to make the transition so that way our tech person can continue on. So if you're watching on over YouTube, Rumble, Twitter X, whatever platform you're on right now, and you'd like to participate in the discussion with the panelists today, you must be registered with the Zoom link. And you can do that by either going into the YouTube description and finding the IPC link to RSVP, and you will receive the Zoom link to join. Or if you're on any other platform, please go to schillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the website is the International Peace Coalition RSVP page. It's one of the sliders on the top. So just sign up and you'll get the Zoom link. And with that, Dave, just let me know when we've made that transition.